Hey, this is NX, and I'm gonna quickly go over one of the quick reference guides I have up on my website under tutorials. So it's nxproductions.eu/tutorials, and the quick reference guides are on the left here, besides the list of tutorials. So I'm gonna go into the BPM to note length conversion, and this is something that I discussed in my kick tutorial, but it also relates to all sorts of envelopes you make, because anytime you change what the millisecond is, so if it's on an attack, a decay, yeah, a release, any sort of envelope you put on, it relates to a note in electronic dance music. So when we open this here, we have on the y-axis, the left-hand side, the first column, this is the beats per minute. So we have from 100 beats per minute to 240 beats per minute. And I also made this chart because there were none of these that went up to like a hardcore and Frenchcore BPMs. I would always have to multiply something or divide it to get to actually the tempo that I'm working in, but now it's good for everyone. Okay, on the x-axis, so on the top row here, we have what the note increments are. We have them spelled out on the top, so a whole note, half note, quarter note, triplet note, and under there is how you would kind of write out what the note was. So if we look how to use that, so it's in matrix form, which I like because you just find the BPM you have and find the note that you want, and then you just go in and find the coordinates of that. So you find where that column intersects with that row, and then you have your milliseconds that makes this particular note at the particular tempo or BPM that you're working in. So we're working in 200 beats per minute, for instance, for Frenchcore, and we want to make a quarter note. So we go here to 200 beats per minute, and okay, we know it's down here, and then we say, okay, where is this quarter note up here? That's this third column. And then we just work our way down, and I'm going to use this to help us because it makes you a little less crazy to use a ruler. So we're at 200 here, and then we're looking down from a quarter notes, and we see, okay, this intersects at 300. So this means to make a quarter note at 200 beats per minute, you have 300 milliseconds. And we can go check that in our DAW. So this is the kick tutorial I just made. We have one kick here, and we can put it in our arrangement view. And there's the bars on top, so it goes a quarter of a bar, and the length here is 300 milliseconds. So then we can see, okay, one beat is one kick is 300 milliseconds. So that was pretty straightforward. The way you make this basically is just simply dividing things by 2 or multiplying things by 2, or 2/3 if it's triplets. So this means that a whole note is 1, half note is half of a whole note, a quarter note is half of a half note, an eighth note is half of a quarter note. So that's the reason why we see this trend like we do, and then when you understand that, it makes a lot more sense. So if we're working at 200 beats per minute, we just saw a quarter note is 300 milliseconds. If we want to go to an eighth note, it's half of that, so it's 150 milliseconds. If we want to go to half of that, it's a 16th note, and it's 75 milliseconds. Again, if we divide it by 2 again, it's 37 milliseconds, and by 2 again is almost 20 milliseconds, but the human ear can't really hear any discernible differences for a timing that's under 30 milliseconds. So these ones aren't that important. Just for you to know, these smaller increments here are what correspond to the milliseconds. I guess if you're working in lower BPMs, you could tell the difference, but not at these higher ones. This is the same if you watch my kick tutorial when I made this diagram. So there's the milliseconds on the bottom, and the note lengths on top of those. So one kick goes over a quarter note. Half of a kick, so the midpoint, would go up to 150 milliseconds because that's half of 300, and a quarter of that would go up to 75 milliseconds because that's a 16th note. When you use this for things like envelopes, here, so we have our mids that we're using for our kick, and we want to make a sidechain compression. So I have this compressor on here. It has a sidechain in from the talk. So from this first attack, this is the really bass, the first like oomph part of the kick. And whenever that plays, we want the middle to get out of the way so the frequencies don't clash. So to do this, I have a sidechain from the talk. So it's taking that audio in, and whenever that audio is played, it triggers a decrease in the volume of this mid. But we have to tell it how do you create that decrease? Is it right away? How long do you leave the decrease on for? And how sharply do you decrease it? So the sharpness is the knee here. So it's usually the sharper the better on a kick, but you can also increase it here, and it means it's more subtle if it's a larger knee. The ratio is by how much it decreases the mid when the attack is playing. So I want it to decrease it completely so they just don't muddy each other at all. So when we're talking about milliseconds, what's relevant here is the attack and the release. So I want a short attack. So right when this talk starts to play, this mid is like shut off completely because the ratio is fully compressed. We don't hear it at all. There's no waveform. But how long after that is it going to stay compressed? So this is what the release does here. So I set this as 37.5 milliseconds, and that's the equivalent of a 1 30-second note. In the last tutorial, so it's here. This is the 1 30-second note. Oh, I hope that's not mirror image for you. Anyway, so it's the equivalent of, 37.5 milliseconds, just because I really want to get the first bass out of the way. And then after that, I can do other things to fix it. Like I can do an LFO to shape some of the other stuff that's happening. So this is the way it would look. And we don't hear anything anyway. So see, it's compressing and then it's releasing over 37.5 seconds. If we make the release a lot longer, then the envelope takes longer in time to release. So we hear less of that mid. If it's right away, we hear basically all of that mid because it goes like on and off at the same time. Okay, so that is why I had 37.5 milliseconds here. So it's because I wanted it to be the same as a, what was it here? As a 30-second note on my compressor. So I'm not going to talk about this too much more. So we know, so to go from whole, half, quarter, eighth, 16th, we just divide by 2. And the same is true to go between the triplet notes. So anything that has a T here is on a triplet scale or triplet intervals instead of quarter intervals. So it's like 3/4 instead of 4/4, but we still measure it on 4/4 time by using this T here. So that's why it's not saying 1/3, it's saying 1/4T, which is 1/4 triplet. And the triplet length is always a little bit less than the quarter length because a triplet is a third and a quarter is a quarter. And a third is 33.3%, and a quarter is 25%. So that's why it is a little smaller. You see that in the MIDI here. So on a quarter grid, so we have like whatever this random note is, we'd have like 1 bar, 2 bar, 3 bar, 4 bar, or 4/4 of a bar, sorry. And then you have your 4 beats within your one loop, within your one bar. And those are on the 1, 2, 3, 4 beats. But if we change it to a triplet grid, then we can just make those a little bit longer here. And then you have 3 instead of 4, but you can play it over the same because it's the same bar length. Yeah, so I hope that helps you. If you want to see how this is applied to different things, you can go to my other tutorials. Thanks.